X-Men 97, Episode 4 is a 2-for-1 combo and oh my god! We get two radically different stories, with part 1 being about Jubilee and Sunspot getting trapped in a video game by Mojo on Jubilee's 18th birthday, while part 2 shows us Storm beginning her emotional journey with Forge to regain what she lost. So far, the show's fast-paced storytelling has worked out in its favor, but is that still the case? And as usual, spoilers ahead, proceed with caution. Part 1, Motendo, is the random fun adventure part of the episode. So it's Jubilee's 18th birthday, and the X-Men are ready to make her feel like the birthday Big Mac. Her term, not mine. She wants to go to the arcade like the good old days, but Magneto wants her to train in the danger room instead. Jubilee totally isn't here for that, because of course. So she and Roberto go to hang out in her room when she notices a totally not Sega Genesis with a totally not X-Men Sega game. The console comes to life and transports the gifted youngsters to a video game dimension, complete with some light but satisfyingly creepy imagery of the game's circuitry taking over their bodies. Also, Roberto still hates video games. From here, Jubilee and Roberto are forced to play a literal game for their lives as they fight off Sentinels, FOH members, and even boss fights with old school Magneto, complete with video game-esque attack patterns and speech patterns. Seriously, I was just waiting for this dude to go, "Welcome to die, come X-Chicken." The locations and enemies are based on Jubilee's memories from the OG show, as well as plenty, and I mean plenty, of Easter eggs. It's gonna throw your nostalgia senses into overdrive, especially if you're into 90s video games and 90s culture in general. We even get in-game shots of Jubilee and Sunspot 16-bit style, like they were ripped straight out of a Konami arcade game. Fitting, since Konami made the X-Men beat-em-up arcade game that we're all familiar with. But they're also giving the Capcom side of things love too. This portrait and custom nameplate border is straight out of Marvel vs. Capcom 1. Now I'm not going to spoil every Easter egg, but there are plenty of iconic 90s TV, song, and movie references. Shout out to Barbie Girl, shout out to Aqua. But getting back to the plot, Jubes and Sunspot are fighting for their lives, but Jubilee's low-key loving this. Since every location or level is taken straight out of her memories, she's getting to relive the good old days of X-Men's adventures before the events of 97 began. I guess when the current problems on your plate include clones, multiple friends and teammates leaving, and having the guy who was once your worst enemy now be your leader, any of the crazy shit of yesteryear becomes preferable. And to be fair, they are clearing through these levels pretty quickly thanks to a certain masked ally who keeps showing up to intervene. But that's when the villain of the episode finally shows his recently nipped and tucked post-gastric bypass surgery face.
Mojo here, your primetime psycho interdimensional alien TV producer who feeds off ratings. My greatest hit? Putting the X-Men through overly complicated death traps to entertain my slaves! Indentured audiences, sorry! Ratings are down, 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 and thirsty for the next big thing, dirty girl! That's why I made the pivot to video games, the future of mind-nummery! This is the dream, Jubilee. Be young forever, replay the golden hits, no growing up!
And what if we refuse to play your game? What then? None of this is even real.
Well, I don't want to say something scary, like if you die in the game, you die in real life, but... stakes.
Birdo is way past over all of this. He is ready to go. Not just because he fears for his life, but because he sees that Jubilee is getting way too sucked into this. She's enjoying this romp through memory lane just a little too much. We see that Jubilee is longing for the normalcy of the good old days. And I like the fact that even though this is the fun retro adventure episode, it also has a statement to give. One of the dangers of nostalgia and holding on too much to the past. And it's good to think fondly of past times every now and then. But if you're not careful, you can get stuck in that yearning for simpler and better times. So she falls victim to literal nostalgia bait. It's a very on-the-nose message, and it is very relevant to us today, especially those of us who are familiar with the whole nerd culture war. Our pair barely survived their boss fight with Magneto, but then our mystery ally from before shows back up to give our duo one more helping hand, as well as some wise words to Jubilee to bring her to her senses. We learn that our mysterious ally is actually Jubilee, an older version of Jubilee, who Mojo created specifically for beta testing the gamer world. This is actually a character from the comics named Abscissa, though she's not named in the show, at least not audibly. If you have the subtitles turned on, you see her name right there. In the comics, she was an alt-universe version of Jubilee who gets kidnapped by Mojo and spends decades slaving away for the demented master of interdimensional entertainment. Also, she's voiced by Allison Court, Jubilee's original voice actress. Gotta respect the OGs, especially when they're in literal torch-passing roles like this. So the two Jubilees, plus Sunspot, who's finally ready to start using his powers, take on Mojo for a final boss battle. And I gotta say, this show is dedicated to making sure every member of the team has their moment. Jubilee is in rare form, and Abscissa shows off feats that rival Cyclops' first fight in episode number 1. I have no commentary and I have no objections, it's just fucking cool to see. They take out Mojo in what I can only describe as a fireworks spirit bomb, which destroys the whole video game dimension and returns our gifted youngsters back to the real world, where they celebrate their first shared near-death experience with their first kiss. There's a lot to like about this section. Balls to the wall, random craziness. Mojo was great for that in X-Men the Animated Series, and the same is the case here. Speaking of Mojo, I really like the updates they did to him. They made him less sleazy 90s TV exec and made him more modern sleazy TV exec, at least in terms of his personality. But I just love how absolutely over the top Mojo is. You know, when he shows up, he's one of those villains that you're gonna love to hate. But I've seen people dismiss this episode as just too light, too weird. I don't think the problem is that it's necessarily too light or too weird. I do think that it's a sharp tonal change from episode 3, and it's gonna be an even sharper tonal change when we get into Life Death. And I think that this might be one of this episode's biggest sins, trying to sandwich two radically different types of stories and narratives together where they usually wouldn't fit. Now, as it pertains to the episode itself, I really didn't have a problem with it. Yeah, it was resolved way too quick. That comes with the territory when it comes to really short episodes. I'm at least glad that this was something that's pretty inconsequential. It's not really tied to anything larger or something that you would want to be spaced out across multiple episodes, maybe even take up a good chunk of the season, like Life Death. The episode starts off with Storm and Forge enjoying some of Forge's homemade bison chili. Storm's still getting to know Forge, but we can tell there's a connection there. Forge is sincere and warm, with every word and action working to help build Storm back up. They relate to each other as mutants who've each lost something, with Forge sporting cyborg limbs following injuries from war. The deep connection they forge, no pun intended, is touching to watch develop. And I gotta say, I really appreciate this downtime that Storm's getting. I love seeing our Weather Witch fly high just like any other Storm fan, and I love that this show wasted no time establishing exactly what Storm was from episode 1. But just like I love what she is, I think it's equally important to highlight who she is, if not more important. For all the phenomenal cosmic power displays that Storm shows off at any given time, it can be easy to forget about the woman beneath the goddess. And that's one of Life Death's biggest strengths, both in comics and now in cartoon form. I honestly never knew how good it would be to see Aurora simply enjoying a meal with some good company, or seeing her have a friendly race on horseback. Her default setting is larger than life, so seeing these soft, quiet moments are really important and only serve to endear us to her character even more. But I could go on all day about how important it is for us to know Aurora at a deep level. Let's get back to the episode itself. And its shining moment comes after Forge tries to restore Storm's powers. Try saying that 10 times fast. But Forge thinks he's cracked the code and found a way to reverse the effects of the neutralization gun that Storm was shot with. Storm goes out into the night and attempts to control the wind to see if it works.
Winds, heed my command. I am Storm, mistress of the elements. Rise, winds, and move the desert sands. Please, winds, hear me. Please.
Characters are defined strongly, not by their accomplishments, but by their darkest hours and how they overcome them. And just as we should see Storm happy and content and letting her hair fly in the wind, it's also important for us to see her being a vulnerable, hurt human being. Later on that night, Storm walks in on Forge tinkering in solitude, and it's here where Forge gives a confession, his reason for why fixing Storm is so important to him. In the past, Forge worked with the US Defense Department to create anti-mutant technology. His designs formed the foundation for the neutralizing collars and the neutralizing gun that the Executioner used to depower Storm. He claims that a quote-unquote scientist in Scotland made the actual collars and gun. Can't help but think that's Moira McTaggart. This realization understandably upsets Storm, who accuses him of simply using her as a stepping stone on his path of redemption.
This is not a lie.
No, don't you dare.
I could live forever, and still my endless imagination would never conceive of a thing as perfect as you. You are a goddess. Powers be damned. How do you not see that? I love you.
You meant to make me a goddess. Instead, you have fashioned a fool.
Storm takes off. We see her riding in the torrential wind on horseback when suddenly a pair of ethereal red eyes pop up. Storm spook right off her horse, and all of a sudden she falls through the ceiling of Forge's home. Forge runs up to check on her, and this is when this creepy giant demonic owl strolls right in, takes a bite out of Forge, and then chucks him away like unrequested dinner, before locking eyes with the real treat of the night. This is the adversary. The adversary thrives on despair, and in Storm's condition, all she is a delicious meal. And that's where the episode ends. So I'm conflicted.
I love you.
On one hand, I'm impressed with how faithful X-Men 97 has adapted Life Death so far. Although Storm's despair is downplayed compared to the comic book version of Life Death, as well as the aforementioned slap that she gave to Forge after she finds out the truth. I mean, in the comics, she decked his ass like George McFly did to Biff in Back to the Future. Another change is how Storm finds out about Forge's involvement in the making of the neutralizing gun. In the comics, Storm overhears a phone call between Forge and Gyrick, where Forge openly admits that he designed the gun only because he didn't know that Aurora was listening in on the other line. Where in the show, he confesses on his own due to guilt and his growing feelings of love for Storm. It really does make Forge out to be a more likable character. Instead of just getting caught, he genuinely comes off as caring for Storm and feeling remorseful. It's good that he came out and told her the truth, but it doesn't take away the pain of knowing that a person who you're falling for played any role in one of the worst moments of your life. And the fact that the adversary is showing up is also a good thing, because the adversary is actually a key villain to both Forge and Storm. I'm happy for so many things involving Life Death. But then there's that issue, that pesky little issue that I've been bringing up for every single X-Men 97 video that I've done. I said specifically in the last video that Life Death is an X-Men story that needs to take its time. The fast-paced plot progression that we've gotten so far is not going to serve this arc at all. It can work. I just think that crunching such a crucial point in Storm's progression as a character into a 15-minute mini episode for it to conveniently wrap up 1 or 2 episodes later, I just don't feel like that's the best way to adapt this story. This easily could have gotten 2 or 3 full episodes. And okay, I get it. You don't want to pull away too much from the main team. I understand. There's a lot of other things going on. Some people theorize that the producers just probably weren't confident that a whole episode with this tone would work. I liked what we got. It was just not enough time. Maybe that's me being a Storm fan, wanting them to give more time to something that I know is so important and is gonna have such a great payoff. Because I didn't have nearly as much of a problem when they comprised multiple arcs into one episode in Fire Made Flesh. Even though the changes cut out a lot, they ultimately worked out for the better. They made Scott and everyone else involved be so much stronger of characters and portrayed in a much better light. So it's possible they could do that here, but I just really want this story to have room to breathe. Life Death Part 2 is scheduled to air next week on April 17th, and it looks like it's going to be a full episode. We'll probably get a scene at the end of this week's episode that sets it up, where we see Storm in some other location or dealing with the adversary. I'll accept Life Death Part 1 for what it is, but Part 2, I need that shit to be flawless. But it wouldn't be an X-Men 97 review episode on Storm Corey HQ if we didn't go over some X-Men bars, so let's quickly cover a couple. We got some examples of attempts of 90s era youth speak, with Jubilee calling herself the birthday Big Mac. She also called Absessa the Hot Topic Stalker when she didn't know who it was. I've heard better, but I've heard much worse too, and I appreciate the attempt. But she actually had a more authentic 90s line when she went,
"Duh, we're totally in a video game."
Speaking of video games,
The only people who hate video games are bad at video games.
couldn't have said it better myself, Jubes. We also have a bar coming from our Weather Witch Storm.
You, of all people, should know the perils of trusting those in Washington.
I just love that line because I think both quote-unquote sides can agree with. Nothing goes well when you trust politicians. Thank you, Storm, for speaking truth to power, even in your darkest hour. Thank you for joining me for this dive into X-Men 97 episode 4. Be sure to let me know how you felt about the episode, both parts of the episode, down in the comments, and let's have us a conversation. And after that, you already know what time it is. Click on this video right here to get you some more Weather Witch goddessness in your life. And best believe there's gonna be some powers involved. And until next time, keep simping.